Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Economics with Robert Wenzel. I'm Robert Wenzel. The topic for this episode is what socialists don't get about CEO compensation. The socialist senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, has introduced a bill into the United States Senate called the Tax Excessive Pay Act. So Bernie obviously thinks that there's some kind of excessive pay going on in the business world, and he's going to stop it. This is clearly a Marxist perspective. It's about this class struggle that doesn't exist. He thinks because some employees earn a lot less than top executives, that therefore there's some kind of um, excessive pay going on here, which means A, he doesn't understand how top managers, executives are compensated. B, he has no idea what the bill he's introduced is going to cause. It's going to hurt low income workers. I'm going to explain why today. All right, so first let's understand what this bill's calling for. It's basically calling for additional tax on businesses if the CEO of the company earns 50 times more what the average worker is. If the CEO earns 100 times more, the tax goes up, and it goes up even higher if it's 500 to 1. Now, let's take a look at what's going on with top companies here in the United States. The Economic Policy Institute, which is a leftist institute, took a survey of 350 top companies and found that the average pay for CEOs is between 14.5 million and 21.3 million. You have to do a range because it depends upon how you measure some parts of compensation, which are stock options, and you measure them when the CEO gets them or when they're exercised, whatever. But we can work with that. So the range is 14.5 million to 21.3 million. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the 350th company, because Economic Policy Institute measured 350 companies, not necessarily all part of the Fortune 500, but uh, some a good chunk were. So let's take a look at the 350th company on the Fortune 500, and that company is Campbell's Soup. The company is worth $15 billion. Their annual revenues are $2.2 billion. And the revenue, the compensation of Mark Klaus, its CEO, is 12.5 million. So it falls right in the range, just below the low end of the range, what Klaus is earning. So let's take a look at that in terms of another situation, another for-profit business, and see what's going on there. And this is going to help us understand what's going on. The company I want to look at, the business I want to look at, is the New York Mets. It's valued at roughly 2.5 billion. And we know that's a good solid number because Steve Cohen, a hedge fund operator, just paid that amount of money for the New York Mets. So we can certainly say it's worth 2.5 billion. But note here, it's significantly lower than the 15 billion that Campbell's Soup is worth. Okay, that's going to be important in a minute here. In addition, the revenues of the New York Mets are roughly around 325 million. All right, now compare that to the revenue of Campbell's Soup, which is $2.2 billion in revenue. Okay, now I want to take a look at some news that just came out where a shortstop for the New York Mets was just signed to a 10-year, $340 million contract. Okay. Now, the executive, the baseball player is Francisco Lindor, who is a shortstop. Good, great, very, very, very good baseball player. Hits roughly about 30, 35 home runs a year. Certainly not Babe Ruth, but a very, very good guy. So why did Steve Cohen, a shrewd hedge fund operator, just sign a baseball shortstop for $340 million over 10 years? So that's $34 million a year. Certainly more than the head of Campbell's Soup is earning, 3 times as much roughly. Okay, so why did Steve Cohen do that? because he knew that's going to attract fans. It's going to put fans in the seats. It's going to cause people to watch the New York Nets on television, and it will mean additional revenues for the New York Mets. That's how it works. If you've got somebody that can bring in uh, a significant amount of additional revenue, you pay them a lot of money if that's what it takes. That's the same thing that goes on with corporate CEOs. Now, in baseball, we all can hit a baseball and know if we just had a little more training and practice a little more, we'd all be Babe Ruths and all that. But we also know that we don't hit the baseball the way a professional Major League Baseball player hits it, and we don't hit it out of the park. None of us listening to this, maybe there's one guy out there I know who might be able to do this, but most of us are not able to hit the ball out of the park against Major League pitching. Okay, so that's why we're not getting $340 million over 10 years. Now, here's what's interesting. The same thing happens with CEOs. There are some extremely talented chief executive officers. Now, it looks easy for us. You sit back, as that old Jim Croce song says, you sit back in a chair, put your feet up, smoke a cigar, and, dispense with some rules and regulations, and that's it. But it's not. There's some very, very good CEOs that can really do a lot for a company. So Campbell Soup, for example, is worth $15 billion. So if the CEO can figure out just A, keep everything smooth so nothing falls apart, and B, come up with just maybe one small idea that increases revenue by 10%, which would probably increase the value of the company by 1.5 billion. What you've got is a situation where you're paying the guy 12 million and he's increasing your value of your company by 1.5 billion. You don't have to be a superstar in math to figure out that works every time. Pay a guy 10 million and he can increase the value of the company by 1.5 billion. You're going to do it every time. It's the same reason that Steve Cohen is willing to pay $340 million to a baseball shortstop, because he knows he's going to generate that much more in revenue. That's how it works. Same kind of compensation goes for corporations. We all think we can be Major League Baseball players if we just put in the time, and we all think we can manage Fortune 500 companies better than the current CEOs. But the talent that's actually able to do this is very, very small. And if they can just tweak things a little bit by increasing revenues, it can mean a lot to a company. So that's what goes on. That's why these CEOs get this much money. It's nothing excessive. There's no reason to compare it to what an average worker does. An average worker goes in there, he creates X amount of revenue for the company, and the company compensates him for him. That's the way it works. He's not building the massive part of the company that's lifting the value of the company overall. If you're a dock worker, you're taking X amount of goods and putting them into a truck or emptying them from a truck, and you can actually calculate how much of the cost that is relative to what you can sell it. It's not increasing things for the whole company. But that's what Lindor does for the New York Mets. He increases incredible amounts of value. That's why Steve Cohen is paying him that. And that's what a good CEO can do. If he can keep everything stable so nothing collapses, and that's important in and of itself, but in addition to that, he can come up with the one idea that sort of tweaks the company by 10%. That's a huge amount. You would pay that guy $12 million every year. That's why they're getting paid that. It's got nothing to do with what the average worker does, who you can tell is doing a very, very limited amount of thing. The guy that sells popcorn in the stands, you can know exactly what to pay him because you know how much popcorn he's going to sell. He's not going to increase stadium revenues overall. He's not going to cause more people to watch it on television. He's going to sell so much popcorn, and there's a bunch of other people that can sell the popcorn with like he does. So there's a huge amount of competition for that job, but there are not that many Francisco Lindors. It's just not the case. There are some people that are extremely talented, and that's why they get that money. Now, if they're somehow stopped from getting that kind of money, it screws things up. If Lindor, for example, couldn't get paid more than the average Little League player, then he'd be getting nothing. He'd be playing in a Little League park somewhere. He's originally from Puerto Rico. He'd probably be playing in Puerto Rico and nobody would be watching him on TV. If you sort of force his wages to use an extreme reducto ad absurdum, if you bring his wages down to that of the average Little League player, there's no reason he's gonna be maybe in a city he doesn't like. Who knows? He would be playing in a sandlot somewhere. It's the same thing with compensation for a large corporation. If you got a major CEO and you're sort of taxing in a way that pushes his wages down, then why does he want the headache of running a multi-billion-dollar corporation? Maybe the perks are enough for him to do it, but it might be if his compensation is low enough, he might say, you know, the hell with this. I can do this running a small convenience store. Why do I want the headaches of a multi-billion-dollar corporation that if something goes wrong, that I'm going to be blamed for it? So that's part one. Bernie does not get that. Okay, not at all. It's clear by him calling it excessive pay for CEOs. It's not excessive pay. It's the pay that's required to get that limited number of executives who appear to be able to manage large, vast organizations, keep everything smooth, and figure out how to tweak things to increase value even more. That's what all the companies are looking for. Not everybody can do that. Everybody thinks they can do it. Everybody thinks they can be a major league baseball player. Not the case. That's why these people are getting that kind of money. But let's go beyond that. Let's look at what happens when Bernie let's say this passes, okay? What it's going to do for corporations and the CEOs, it's going to say, why would I want low earning employees? Because that's just going to look like the ratio between what I earn and what they earn is going to be that dramatic. So if I run McDonald's and McDonald's hires a lot of low wage workers, I'm going to try and figure out how to eliminate low wage workers. I'm going to put more kiosks in where there's robots taking those. I'm going to figure out ways to have robots cook the hamburgers and do everything. You're moving to a robotic system because the low wage earners are the ones that are doing the things that tend to be repetitive and are easier to duplicate in terms of working on a daily basis. So they're much easier to convert to robotic businesses than things that require where there's a lot changing and you need more analytical skills. So basically what Bernie is doing would be, if this bill passes, is driving companies to go more robotic because it's going to improve the ratio. It's not going to help low wage earners. As a matter of fact, because there's going to be less demand for low wage earners, the wage for low wage earners is going to drop. That's what Bernie's doing. He has no idea what this bill does. He doesn't think, he's very, very shallow. He's saying, oh, well, I'll tax these people and this is going to force them to push down the compensation of CEOs. No, it's not. That guy's up there because he knows how to run a business and keep the thing smooth and can come up with great ideas that can boost a company. And when you get something that's going to increase your taxes, you figure out, well, what do I do to cut the tax down? And if I'm getting taxed because I have too many low-income employees, I'm going to cut the number of low-income employees and bring in more robots. That's what's going to happen. Bernie has no idea what he's doing. It's doing completely the wrong, opposite thing of what he thinks it's going to do. It's not going to help low-income workers. And secondly, he's got this Marxist mentality that there's some kind of struggle between the average worker and the CEO. No such thing. It's like the same thing, like as if there was a struggle between Francisco Lindor and a Little League baseball player. Makes no sense at all. It's two different worlds, two different things going on. Bernie doesn't think like that. He thinks like an egalitarian. He thinks the whole world is the same, except for him, of course, because when he puts a power authority idea down, he wants everybody to follow it because he thinks he knows more than everybody else. But outside of him knowing everything more than anybody else, there's nobody else that does that. To him, everything else is the same. CEO executive, same as a worker. Why should there be this great difference? Well, I explain why, because it depends upon how much value he can create. Same thing with a baseball player. Baseball player is super talented. He can command an awful lot of money. And it would be absolutely silly to try and drive his wage down to that of a little leaguer. Bernie Sanders has no clue as to what he's doing. And that's my episode today. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check me out at economicpolicyjournal.com, where I write every day about the economy, about economic policy, about economic events, and economic players in the economic sphere. It's Monday through Friday, and then I do more on Saturday and Sunday. I don't stop. I'm writing all the time. economicpolicyjournal.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.